And welcome back. So what you're going to see in the upcoming video is pretty much a major problem that we discovered today. Going back to basics and, like I mentioned in the video, doing what we should have done from day one rather than just a sampling, which was after we had the fuel pump replaced and just kind of making the engine continue to run by feathering the gas. The misfire counters fell down to just 4 and 7. And going off that information, as well as discovering a video from South Main Auto, who had a Dodge with a very similar set of symptoms to ours, we went back, as you'll see in the video, and kind of old school compressor tested every cylinder. The scan tool, at least for either the truck or a limitation of the scan tool, one of the two, didn't have the option for a relative compression test, and I don't have a scope to be able to do that either. I wish I had an automotive scope, but I do not. So we went old school with it. What you're going to see us do is, or talk about that we did, was that we removed one spark plug from each cylinder systematically. So we started with the passenger side, removed one from each cylinder as we did the test. So we removed a spark plug from cylinder 2, tested, then took one out of cylinder 4, tested, so on and so forth until we got all the way back to cylinder 7. When we did that with one spark plug hole still retaining the spark plug and the second spark plug hole with the pressure tester screwed into it, you'll hear me make a comment, and I'll say it again, there's nothing more distinctive than the sound of a engine that's turning over with no compression. Because remember, we hadn't been putting the spark plugs back in. So as we were doing our tests, with each spark plug removed, it got a little bit easier and a little bit easier for the engine to turn over. But even if you had just one cylinder functional, you can still hear the engine undergo compression when it gets to that cylinder. In this case, it was like that, like cylinder 7 had no spark plugs at all. And the video is going to be a little grainy, but I did get a little bit of a video from the bore scope itself, just trying to show you what looks to be a stuck open valve. So the next step is going to be to remove the valve cover, obviously, and check to see if in fact we do have a broken spring. Since the valve is held open, very likelihood that it could just be a broken spring not allowing that valve to close. It could also be a damaged lifter in some way that's keeping the push rod extended out and possibly holding the valve open. I don't know, but we'll have to get that cover off. If it's not a broken spring, it could be a damaged valve seat, but I didn't see any damage on the top of the piston, as you'll see me comment in the video. I didn't see any large bits of metal, anything of that nature sitting on top of that piston. I don't see evidence where the piston came in contact with the valve. None of that stuff. So we'll know more when we get a chance tomorrow to pull that valve cover off that driver's side and actually see what's going on. So best case scenario, we got a broken spring that we can change out what's on the vehicle. We can get that changed out and proceed from there. Worst case scenario is going to be that it's going to need a cylinder head, at least on the driver's side. But we won't know that until obviously we can get into it. So I wanted to shoot this as just a kind of a beginning, because I left some of the stuff out because, again, I'm kind of rushing to do some of this stuff as time permits during the day when I can get out of work. But I wanted to, and I'll link the video in the description, but I wanted to, and I wanted to say that I got kind of started on this avenue based a lot on that video that I found from South Main Auto, which in that case he did have a Dodge Ram with a very similar set of running conditions, I'll say. But I'll put a link to that video in the description in case you want to watch it. In his case, he found a broken valve spring in the intake. Again, doing a relative compression test would have found that cylinder 7 wasn't contributing, as well as being able to do a leak down test in cylinder 7 would have also shown that it couldn't hold on to air. It would have been pretty much 100% blow by with that valve being stuck open. Those two items, again, I don't have. I don't have access to a leak down tester, at least yet, and I don't have access to a scope. Again, I wish I did, but that'll be a future item. But that's where it's at. It's a little bit of a long-winded explanation, but with that, I'll cut you back to the video, and I'll bring you back when we get that valve cover off, and well, we'll see what's up then. Thank you much. Bye. And welcome back. So, went back to the basics on this after we did the fuel pump on the previous video, and you saw that we did have pressure. I grabbed the fuel rail off the red one that you see up there that we talked about doing, just to isolate any more potential issues with fuel injectors, because remember, we had one bad number 5. We found one cram full of sugar when we were cleaning it. So this fuel rail, which is known good along with all of its injectors, is off the red one. We quickly put that one on here, and it did get better. It did start better and overall run, but it's still in the same issue where after it tries to come off idle and starts getting choppy, you have to give it gas to keep it running. So with that being said, this is something I should have did from day one, but I didn't do it, so part of it's my fault. However, diagnosing the fuel pressure issue led us to the sugar in the tank, which had to be fixed, the weak fuel pump, which had to be fixed. So the items that we diagnosed needed to be fixed, but had I pressure checked all of the cylinders, if you remember on the first video, I didn't do packs 1 through packs 5 and 7. I didn't pull the spark plugs out because I looked at the other conditions of all the other plugs and figured, all right, 6 of the 8 were fine, surely the other 2 were okay. So I pulled the spark plugs out, and they were a little bit sooty, just like the other ones were, but they were fine. They've also been changed out, so were the coil packs. So as you can see, we fought with it. We finally got the coil packs out, and we got one of each spark plug out. We put a pressure gauge on it. We verified it with 2 pressure gauges, but we pressure tested each individual cylinder. I wanted to do this with the scan tool, but the scan tool for this truck, or at least my scan tool for this truck, doesn't have an option of doing a power balance test, or a relative compression test, sorry. So we did it old school. Got 2 pressure gauges out, dropped 1 spark plug out of each cylinder, and pressure tested it. Now number 4 is weak, but it's still around the 120, sometimes 140 range. It's still high enough compression that it should fire. However, when we put the new fuel rail on and we're giving it gas to keep it running, misfires were left on 2 cylinders, 4 and 7. And if you look up who the companion cylinders are on this motor, surprise, surprise, 4 and 7 are companions. Now with that said, we went ahead and pressure tested everything, every cylinder. Everything with the exception of 4. And I shouldn't say everything, but everything on the passenger side, with the exception of 4, is close to each other, or within tolerance. Again, 4 is a little on the weaker side, about 140. Everything else is clocking in at a pretty high PSI, and I need to research what the PSI for this engine actually is supposed to be. I think work's been done to this engine because the pressure rating is probably a little higher than I would have expected. But with that being said, enough rambling. We got to number 7, 0 compression. Verified it twice. One plug still left in the cylinder, pressure gauge in the other spark plug hole, made sure everything was tight, checked it twice. You hit the key, and there's nothing more distinctive than the sound of an engine spinning over that has 0 compression. Because as I was doing, or I should say, as we were doing this, I wasn't putting the 1 spark plug back in the cylinder. So we check a cylinder, we leave 1 plug out, basically leaving it open, so the engine's kind of easier and easier and easier to spin over as we were doing our checks. Then we got to number 7, And like I said, there was zero, you could hear it, zero compression. The pressure gauge also proved it. So I'm going to try to splice into the back of this video a short video that we took using the bore scope, and the microphone on that is crappy at best. I did try to scream into it, so hopefully you can hear me. And what you'll see in there, you'll see a little bit of a shot of one of the valves that's kind of hanging open. And I've spun the engine over a couple of times and I haven't seen that valve close, and I think I should have. Top of the piston's clean. It doesn't look like there's any impact marks. I don't think the valve is bent. When we get this valve cover off, and I'll bring you back when we do that, I think we're going to find that we probably have, or at least I hope we have, a broken spring in there. Since the valve is hanging open and not being held shut and not opening enough, since it's hanging open, that's why I think hopefully it's just a broken spring not allowing that valve to close. But with number 7 being a completely dead cylinder, zero compression, that would explain pretty much all the issues that we've seen with this vehicle up front. Again, not saying that it wasn't needed to chase the fuel system, not saying that it wasn't needed to clean the sugar out of the tank and replace the pump. All that needed to be done, and thankful what we caught it. But the issue that we're going to chase right now is zero compression in the number 7 cylinder. We're going to drop this valve cover off next and take a look at those springs. If it is just a broken spring, we should be able to get the necessary equipment in there to change that spring while the head is on the motor without having to pull the head off. But that's it for now. Let's go, and I'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. Okay, and welcome back. So what you're seeing there is a shot of cylinder 7 of one of the valves. I'll see if I can get it to back up a little bit. The mic on this is terrible. I'm going to try to scream to get it to pick up, but you can see that valve right there is open. And I've cranked the engine over a couple of times and looked at it again, and it still seems to be open about the same as it was. It doesn't look like it's bent, nor has it made contact with the piston, because you can see the top of the piston right there below it. And it doesn't look like there's any damage. It doesn't look like the valve's bent, but you can see it cracked open. Okay, so with that being said, I'll bring it back to the normal part of the video, and then we'll explain why we're scoping this one. So I'll talk to you in a bit. Bye.